This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. Kane, Pitman and Olgun Uluc coming back to you just moments after the Opals take down Serbia in what was really a dominant performance. And Olgun, let me just start by saying what a difference 9 days can make in Lille against Nigeria. It looked disastrous. We had a conversation about how bad it was. The team themselves said it was embarrassing. And then today against Serbia, they had to confront some pressure. They had to deal with the full court press. They had to deal with runs from this Serbian team. And there was nothing that this team could not handle. And in the end, 85-67 is your final. And this was incredibly comprehensive. And now, no matter what, we don't know if it's gold or it's bronze, but the Opals will be playing for a medal on the last day of the Paris 2024 Olympics. That is a massive success.
After that Nigeria game, I don't know if I ever would have thought that you'd say those words.
Yeah,
it looked extremely grim after that game, and every single game beyond that, you've seen growth in either somebody or in some area. And the new one today was Jade Melbourne, and we've been on her this entire time. We both had an understanding of the skill set, and we knew that the potential was there for her to go and do something, and the breakout game was coming, and it came today. And boy, was it good. Boy, did she just look like exactly what we thought she would. She was athletic. She controlled the pace of the game. There's a bit of giddy to her. There's something about that where she's throwing these passes that only she sees, and she's making plays that only she can make. Honestly, and again, there's been one every game, but every game there's something, and it bodes well for the next one. Now, the next game is more than likely against the USA or against that Nigeria team. It's going to be a tough one regardless, but I think the growth has been super, super positive.
So through the first 3 games of this tournament, Jade Melbourne had 17 points. She had 3 assists and she had 8 turnovers. And there was moments, again, there was flashes. Certainly the first 5 minutes of the Olympics against Nigeria, she was the best player on the floor in that little stretch there. So we've seen it. We know that she's capable. So I mentioned those numbers, 17 points, 8 turnovers. Today, she has 18 points. She has 5 assists, and she only has 3 turnovers. And a couple of those turnovers actually came very late in this game. So when the game really mattered, when the Opals won the game, Jade was able to control the tempo. And I think sometimes, because it's such a small sample, I think that we do overlook the ability for players to work their way into a tournament, work their way through experiences. And I do think that we've seen it on the men's side. But for Jade to walk into an absolute storm that this team walked into against Nigeria as the point guard, as a 21-year-old, and then to be able to figure it out slowly against Canada, work through it. And let's face it, you're never going to be under more pressure than this team was against France with that crowd. Because the one thing that has really changed from Lille to Paris is the fact that you go from playing in front of 27,000 crazy French fans to now you're in Paris, and quite honestly, it's still a good atmosphere, but the arena is half the size. There's only 13,000 people in here. It's not the same atmosphere, and you don't have to deal with the home fans. So to see this team respond and to see Jade Melbourne respond, maybe we can almost expect it, because what they just dealt with and everything they've had to go through to this point has been growth. But for it to happen so quickly for her at such a young age, you understand why everyone loves her, and you understand why everyone has such high hopes for the future.
Yeah, her ability to process the game, I think, was really evident, and again, we saw glimpses of it. But tonight, I think it was so clear. And I for me, it's summed up in all the assists she didn't get. There were so many times where she would throw a whip pass to someone for an open shot, or she'd throw it to someone, and that player wouldn't expect that ball to come, and so they weren't ready to shoot it. That's where you get a real sense of just how good she is, right, and how well she can process the game. And I think over the games, she has progressively gotten better and better. The thing that I liked about this was really early in this game, she had a three-point attempt from the left wing, and it was way off, right? It was practically an air ball. And we've seen at times in this tournament where Jade Melbourne makes a few mistakes and doesn't look completely up to it, and she gets pulled out, right? And Tess Madgen comes in, or in that first game, Christy Wallace came in. That didn't happen this time. I think there was a sense that the speed in which Jade Melbourne was playing with was something that was stifling the Serbians, and it was something that was helping Australia's bigs really get going, them running the floor and Jade Melbourne finding them. And I think it was good that Sandy Brondello stayed with her, because then we got the full Jade Melbourne experience, which was her showing off that passing game. She hit a bunch of threes today as well. she looked like she had full control of this team to the point where she was demanding the ball. She was calling for the ball. She wanted to be the one to make plays. And for a 21-year-old, a 20-year-old, that's unbelievably impressive. Again, on this stage where we saw on the men's side, every possession matters. And it took the young guys on that team, the tournament up until that point, to realize that. It's cool that she's realized that, and she's really stepping up to the plate.
So that was the first shot of the game. So I noted it down because, in her defense, the shot clock was running down. Nobody was moving. They were just kind of hot potato in it across the perimeter. And the reason I noted it down was not because Melbourne missed the shot, because ultimately no one looked like they wanted the responsibility of taking that shot. So she kind of had to at that point in time. Yes, she missed badly. But the reason I noted it down was because the Opals in the last game against France took almost 9 minutes to attempt a three. So the fact that the first shot of the game was a three-point attempt, I was like, that's curious. How is this team going to settle into this game against Serbia? But then after that, they had 5 straight layups. And there was 2 possessions in that stretch where they got the full court press. And unlike the game against Nigeria and in stretches against Canada, it didn't have to be Melbourne that was bringing the ball up the floor, trying to get it across the halfway line. Because if Melbourne was under pressure, then, okay, Sammy Whitcomb's going to step up. And if Whitcomb isn't there, then Alana Smith can step up and just break the cycle and catch the ball, and then everyone else can get settled. And they were able to then break that full court press. And a couple of those layups that they got, one of them was from Melbourne. She just walked into an open layup because she snuck out the back of that press. So I think, yes, they knew that it was coming, but I think that they all have been aware and they all have an understanding that that's probably what they're going to see. But I do wonder now whether the opposition, and if it's Team USA, they might not be too concerned about pressing. We'll see how they approach it. But when you talk about the progression for the team through this, maybe it worked in their favor to get absolutely destroyed in that first game, because there was no eking out a win and saying, well, it's Olympics, it's a tough tournament, you got to win the difficult way sometimes. No, they got embarrassed. And then they got to work and they figured out, how are we going to approach this? We've got a point guard, but she's 21. But we've got a whole bunch of capable players that can help bring the ball up the floor and work through that pressure. And I thought after that first shot, they just destroyed this team. It was a layup line, and there was nothing the Serbian team could do about it as this margin continued to grow.
I don't know if they would ever have faced a tougher opponent than Nigeria in this entire tournament, outside of potentially Team USA. That, again, it was a good reality check for this team. And it's weird because in hindsight, you think that this is a team that should be built to break a press like that, because there are those ball handlers. There is Jade Melbourne. There's also someone like Steph Talbot. And the bigs are bigs that are relatively versatile. They do run the floor. They're quite agile. Alana Smith, Ezi Magbagor. And so you would expect this team to do that. And today was the first real example of them being faced with that sort of pressure and then really using that to leverage points on the other end. And I thought they did a really good job of seeing what their advantage was, which I think was their size and their ability to get the ball inside. And I think they forced the issue there. And it largely worked. And it had everything to do with, Jade Melbourne getting 2 feet in the paint and finding people, or Alana Smith being really aggressive offensively. They did a really good job. They got to the free throw line 25 times in this game. They made 22 of them. We've seen some of their free throw issues early in this tournament. Turnovers and free throws has been a big issue for this team in this tournament. They amended that, and that's what led to this win. They found their advantages, and they went right at it.
So just as you look through the roster as well, so they end up with a comfortable lead in points off turnovers, +6. In fast break points, they were +11. So certainly the points off turnovers has been a number that has haunted this team largely throughout this tournament, even as they've eased their way into it. But when we spoke about what's the benefit of actually getting into your sets, what's the benefit of getting into the half court, it's that this team that struggled with the physicality in the opener against Nigeria, their identity has to be that they are a physical team and they can bully teams. And you mentioned Alana Smith, and I thought, if you talk about the impact of Jade Melbourne, and that was without question the fun story of the night, seeing a young rising star of the game break out. There was one player that stamped her authority on the game from the start and said that you can throw multiple bodies at me. I don't really care. I know that you can't stop me. And I thought it was Alana Smith, and she is a massive presence playing at the 4 for this team. And there was a bunch of possessions where they knew we're in the half court. Okay, what are we going to do? Let's just dump it to Alana Smith and she'll figure it out. And it wasn't just the scoring with 22 points or the rebounding with 13 rebounds. She had 4 assists as well. She became a point forward for this team at stages, whether the catch was at the free throw line, whether it was in the post or it was on the perimeter. So she is a piece for this team that hasn't necessarily always been there. Wasn't there at the World Cup 2 years ago. Has had a whole bunch of injuries along the way. But in game one against Nigeria, where they couldn't get settled, she was still the best player on the floor, but she did a lot of it from shooting from the perimeter. Tonight, it was a physical dominance inside that helped establish this as well. So without doubt, the two best players on the floor were Smith and Melbourne. And I don't think that we should overlook the importance of Smith when someone like Steph Talbot gets in early foul trouble and really didn't have an impact on the game at all.
Yeah, and you're underselling Smith too, because you missed out in that big stat line, 2 steals and 2 blocks too. So she's getting it done on both ends.
She's a big girl, man. You look at the size and you understand it, but just the presence on the floor, she looked like a beacon for this team to take over the offense. She's athletic, she's big, and she's strong.
And I look at Ezi Magbagor, who hasn't really found a ton of rhythm offensively, and that has to do with a lot of different things. And I think it's maybe Australia's sort of point guards haven't really gotten going before today. But I think Magbagor has been largely good defensively. I think she's a presence there. And when I look at her and Alana Smith together as a front court defensively, that's really imposing. That's very, very tough to face. And I think Serbia had a lot of issues doing anything in the paint today, though they resorted to shooting a ton of threes. And I thought that was a key for Australia, really being able to get stops and being able to push the pace, which is something that I think they want to do because they know that they have these outlets in Jade Melbourne and players like that who they can get it to and go and get easy buckets. I did this last time we spoke about the Opals, and I'm going to do it again. Shout out to Kayla George, because she comes on. She's done this ever since the Nigeria game. She's come on, and not only has she hit timely threes and hit a lot of threes, but she's also brought like a physicality. And there's something about her being on the floor that makes I would feel safe if Kayla George was my teammate out there, because I know that she's going to make the right play. She's going to hit the tough shot, and she's just going to protect me, right? Whether that's using some physicality or making sure to rally everyone and huddling. She's been such an important piece of this team, and she was barely in the rotation in that Nigeria game. But ever since she has been, I honestly think she's flipped games for the Opals.
I tell you where you don't feel safe with Kayla George is if you're on the opposition. And there was a tie-up late in this game.
The elbow?
She nearly ripped an opponent's arm off. And in the dispute to get the ball, and that player for Serbia, the name escapes me right now, but she actually wandered off to the bench holding her arm, and she looked like she wanted no further part on anything to do with playing in this basketball game. And that's what you talk about. You have to have a little bit of intimidation. And I do think that this Opals team has got that back. And I think Kayla George has been a big part of that. Remember, she only played 2 minutes in that first game against Nigeria as well. So she is a little bit of an enforcer for this team. And I think that she embraces that as well. I mentioned at the start just a couple of the stretches that were really key in this game. So, look, we'd be lying if we said, or certainly me, and I know a bunch of the people that I was sitting with, you'd be lying if you didn't look at the halftime margin and think, well, I can't possibly feel good about this based on what happened 24 hours ago. You just never know what's going to happen. And Serbia started off pretty well. They cut the gap to 39-50 on a 7-0 run early in the third quarter, and it's like, all right, if this gets to 5-6 points and it's a 2-possession game, then everything's on the line. And we've seen this story before. The third quarter during that stretch was when things went absolutely pear-shaped. Use whatever word you want. It was worse than that for the Boomers. For the Opals, so what do they do when it's 39-50? They shut off the scoring for this Serbia team for 6.5 minutes. They go on a 17-0 run. And this is a team that looked fragile only a week ago. But to do that when the pressure was starting to mount, that's toughness. And I think it does go back to what they've been able to work on after the Nigeria game, but it also goes back to the experience they had against France in front of those fans. And that's kind of what Sandy Brondello pointed to after the game. She said, no, it didn't feel good in the moment losing the first game, but we spoke about the fact that if we're going to do anything, it's going to get worse than that. So you have to be able to work through the experiences. And it almost seems like this team getting through that France game when they left the arena the other night and some of the words they said, they were happy about it. They were excited about it. But it also looked like they realized that, all right, yeah, we're back to where we are. We think we are a team that should win a medal in this tournament. Now, nothing's guaranteed right now, but they are carrying a momentum that when things get a little bit tough, when they had a couple of those turnovers, when the pressure got to them, and you're like, wait a second, they just shut it off. They just shut off the tap. And it wasn't one player in particular, but a whole bunch of players scored, including Kayla George. Sammy Whitcomb hit a bunch of really important threes. Alana Smith got to the free throw line. This is a pretty mentally tough team to get through what they've been through.
And you mentioned the veterans, right? And we've mentioned Kayla George and Sammy Whitcomb, Tess Madgen. Every three that these girls hit always feels timely, right? It always feels there was a big Kayla George three that was pretty deep on like the left wing, right? It was right after Serbia hit a three. And I want to say that cut the lead to maybe 12 or really close to single digits. And Kayla George responded with a three of her own that was maybe not even in the flow of the offense. But I think she knew that it was her time to step up, and that was timely. Tess Madgen hit a timely three. Sammy Whitcomb, every time she hits a three, it's the most joyous thing in the world for her. It's very cool. But every three she hits feels like it comes at an important moment. And that is so helpful for this team because it feels like they're really finding their groove offensively. Like defensively, I think that the personnel's there, but offensively, they're really starting to find something. And I think with Jade Melbourne really coming along like she is, and I think with the way that Sandy Brodello is able to utilize Kayla George, not just at the 4 spot next to Ezzy, but also when Alana Smith is doing her thing inside the paint, because she can be quite imposing. You can have Kayla George out there stretching the floor and really widening the floor for Alana Smith. So again, we said it from the very beginning that this was a team that was clearly in its early stages of being together and finding chemistry. And with every game, we're just seeing them find more and more rhythm and more flow playing amongst each other.
So Lauren Jackson picks up the DMP in this game again. And, it's interesting because I think as we've seen in the World Cup a couple of years ago, she really played a minimal role until it really mattered. Who knows whether there's a role to be played, but Sandy was asked about a post-game and she kind of said, well, yeah, she's ready to play. She probably wants to play, and we might need to call on her at some point in time, depending on the matchup, depending on the situation in the game. But also she kind of said, well, the reality is, Kayla George is playing out of her skin. You got Smith playing at the 4. Ezzy hasn't dominated a game like perhaps we've seen in the past, but she has moments within it, and certainly a player that with the athleticism and ability to interrupt shots and be a rim protector. Like it matters for this team, those little things there. So it builds or it fits the athletic DNA of what this team is trying to be. So I think they're in a good spot because leading into this tournament, and we discussed it earlier, and we're like, well, are they going to need a Lauren Jackson special to win a medal? And at the moment, the answer might not be yes. And if that's the answer, then that's great. That's a great spot to be in.
Yeah, and the key is that this team can lay its hat defensively, right? That's what it is. It was against Canada, against France, and now this game. They've done a really good job on the defensive end, and I think that starts with Ezzy and Alana Smith. And if you don't have to interrupt that, then I don't think you should. There may be some sort of questions about Lauren Jackson purely from, I think, in that Nigeria game. She got a bunch of looks in that game around the rim, and I don't know, maybe her legs weren't completely there. And even in this game, everyone sort of got a run at the end in garbage time, and she didn't. I imagine that's just because after sitting there for 40 some odd minutes, you don't want to just be throwing her out there.
Yeah.
It would be very difficult to see her somehow like falling into minutes at this point. And I don't think it's her own fault either. I think it's just because of the gravity of the moment and the nature of how everybody else is playing. And I think everyone else is just finding a rhythm now, and that just is what it is. I'm intrigued to see how Jade Melbourne is able to grow off this one, because I think she clearly made her mark as the player on this team that can guide the pace. And I think that's so important to what this team does. And then in the half court as well, I think her with the ball coming off on balls, she's able to make those whip passes or those cross court passes to the corners, and she's throwing balls, over girls' heads, right? She's finding these little pockets to throw passes to, and I think that's really important. And it's similar to what the Boomers went through with Giddy, where it's like you want to be able to foster that creativity, but you also want her to be careful with the ball. And I thought today she did a really good job of largely taking care of the ball, but her creativity is, I think, what makes her special. So I'd love to see her to continue leaning into that.
I am unsurprisingly, I'm going to write about Jade Melbourne after we finish this podcast. It'll be up on espn.com.au at some point in time once you've finished listening to this podcast. And the reason for that was I just took a bunch of notes today, like looking at the way she interacts with people, the fact that she's on the floor every 30 seconds because she's like this little kamikaze point guard that is not afraid of anything or anyone, which is really cool. And I sort of asked her about that, whether she needs to look after her body and how she's feeling. And she said, well, it's great that this was an 11 a.m. game because I'll be in bed by 3 p.m. Recovering for the next game. And she also said that this is kind of who I am. I'm going to bounce off opponents. I'm going to try unrealistic layup attempts, but it kind of gets my team energized. And I do think that she was part of the breaking of the press today because of her speed. That's what sets her apart from some of the other players. But there was a time in this game around 3 minutes to go in the third quarter where she came off and there was a semi-standing ovation because of everything she was doing. She had 16 points at that point in the game. And she sat next to Lauren Jackson and I looked at them both and they were sort of interacting. And I wondered what Jade was thinking at that time. I wondered what LJ was thinking at that time. And LJ called it her coming out party at the Olympics. She also said that she was very proud of her for getting stuck into the Serbians and having a crack at them a few times, which is the most LJ quote of all time. But then Jade said that she remembered that. And she goes, for a second, I was worried about the lead and we need to try and maintain that. And there's so many things we need to do to win this game. But then she said, I kind of also just like looked to my side, looked up in the stands and said, I'm playing in the Olympics. How sick is this? And it is just a cool, carefree 21-year-old enjoying the moment. And there's something fun about that.
No, I agree. Obviously, you also need a level of seriousness going into these very high-pressure situations now. You're going into a semi-final against potentially Team USA or a Nigeria team that handed it to you in that first game. So I'm excited for what this team has grown into. I wouldn't even say, I think on the men's side, if you said a team is going up against Team USA, you'd give them very little chance to really make any sort of noise. I wouldn't put it past this Opals team, who have clearly taken a ton of strides, to maybe make some noise against either of those teams, purely because I think the personnel is there to do something, right? I think the balance of the team has figured itself out over the course of this tournament. I'm excited to see what happens. And again, it's on Jade Melbourne, it's on Sammy Whitcomb, and if this next game is the one where Ezi Magbagor can find some footing and find some rhythm offensively to back up what she's doing defensively, then I think the sky's the limit for this team.
So as we're recording this, and there's no point getting into it too much because I think by the time most people listen, the matchup will be set. Yes, we think it's going to be Team USA. It's about 6 hours away from tip-off here, but it was kind of an awkward situation after the game because there was a bunch of reporters that wanted to ask about Team USA. And the players are like, well, if it's Team USA, we see a lot of these girls in the WNBA. We're not worried about it. Yes, it'll be difficult. Sandy said, but they're human. They can be beaten. And, well, history says they can't be. But they can be beaten, and we'll be confident going in. And there's no doubt they couldn't be coming in better shape. That doesn't guarantee that they can be competitive. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to be in the game heading into the fourth quarter. But certainly confidence couldn't be any higher. But the alternative, if there is the upset of all time, they get another crack at Nigeria, which I'm sure that they would be very, very excited about as well. But I mentioned it off the top. We wondered with both teams as they sort of fumbled their way through the group stage a little bit, whether we were going to even have an opportunity to have a medal game. The women's medal games are on a Sunday here, so it's the last day of the Olympics as well. I don't know if they'll be the last game or the early game, but either way, it's pretty cool for Australian basketball, particularly the Opals, who have had a little bit of a rough stretch after so long being the team that we all just got used to. They're going to be in a medal game. Can they win gold? We'll see, but they'll be playing for a silver or a bronze. So after the World Cup a couple of years ago, it's good to see this team stable, steady, and together. I think that's the most simple way to put it.
But to be honest, I love those expectations. Because you felt it when they lost to Nigeria in that first game, and it's like, how dare you, right? So how can you lose to this team where you were supposed to be the pinnacle of the sport, right? I like the fact that this Opals team always goes into these tournaments with really high expectations, because then the girls have to go and meet that. And when they do, I think that's like an ultimate achievement that they can go through. To go from a bronze at a third place finish at the World Cup a few years ago to now being in a medal game again, to go back-to-back potential medals in major tournaments, that's unbelievably impressive. Again, if we said that about the men's side, that is an absolute tick, right? But for this women's team to do it, I think it's because it could be bronze and then it could be another bronze based on the success that this team has had historically. It doesn't feel like that much of an accomplishment. But when you look at it in totality in how basketball in Australia has gone as far as its outcomes, I honestly think it would be an unbelievable achievement to do that. And credit to Sandy Brondello, because she takes a lot of hits because it's really easy to criticize the head coach of these national teams. But she's been able to rally the troops here, and they've put themselves in a really, really awesome position.
Head coaches getting blamed for everything, for poor performance,
everything,
for unexplainable turnovers, for an inability to hit shots. Who would have thought?
Missed free throws. Why would you take your head, Gorge?
Why would you take the job? I don't know. These people have a little bit of craziness to them. But Sandy, as you said, she was feeling pretty good after this game, as they should. The Opals are rolling. They will have a semi-final matchup. But I suspect that one, based on the schedule, it's going to be very, very early on Saturday morning. But we'll wait until that is confirmed. But either way, a pretty great day for the Opals today. A dominant performance over Serbia. That'll do it for now. We will be back post-game for that semi-final. Either the Opals going to a bronze medal or gold medal game. We'll have all the coverage you need. And make sure you jump on espn.com.au and the social pages. Plenty of stories, lots of Opals coverage over the next few days as they continue to move on, Ogs.
Yeah, you guys, just so everyone has an idea of the logistics of how this show works, Kane usually finishes at the stadium, does the mix zone, then goes and films like a piece to camera, then he goes home. So I got a good 2.5, 3 hours to kill after every game. And in this case, I watched some skateboarding, and nice. there is a skateboarder from South Africa. His name is Dallas Olpotzer, I think. He's 49 years old, and he's to be so respectful, so bad. He just shouldn't be here. I don't know how you apply to be part of this, but he's somehow performing at the Olympics, and good on him for that. But my goodness, the skateboarding, I think it's the first time at the Olympics. It's a hell of a show.
Poor Dallas.
Yeah.
If he's decided to tune in to the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast, I had nothing to do with that slander. And you're in a teenage game, Dallas, and I respect you for giving it your best. So I'm
not an Olympian, so Dallas, so more power to you.
Goodness gracious. All right, let's wrap it up. Just a little bit of South African skateboard slander to wrap it up. That'll do it. ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast, espn.com.au, your home for hoops. Kane, Pitman, Olgun, Uluc, that'll do it. We'll see you after the semi-final.